So we live in a world suffused with unheard of levels of information, disinformation, misinformation, confusing information, fake news, and so on. The amount of digital TV channels, the amount of online resources, the amount of social media means that any citizen is now surrounded with this crazy amount of information. And in this new world, obviously, there is more chance than ever before to create influence campaigns for people to try to change your mind about something, sometimes openly, which is fine, but often not openly, sometimes using real evidence, but often using fake evidence. And even dictatorships have realized that to practice censorship, as you could in the Cold War, is very hard. And so instead, the strategy is to flood our environment with so much info chaos, with so much information pollution, that the individual doesn't understand anymore what's true and what's not. And that means that it's very hard for us to have the sort of trust and debate and evidence-based policy making that you need for a democracy to survive. And the only real long-term strategy to deal with this is for people to become very educated and very wise in how they negotiate their ways through this info chaos. And here's where it gets very complicated. You know, the sort of education we can do to help people understand what is a reliable source and what isn't. How you can tell a piece of real news apart from a piece of fake news. But we have to remember, as we do this, that the ultimate goal is not to make people cynical. It's very easy to become cynical in this environment. It's very easy for people to just go, you can't trust anyone. I'm just going to retreat into my little world. When that happens, that actually plays into the hands of a lot of today's propaganda, whose aim is not to convince you of something, but whose aim is to make you feel that you can't understand anything in this world and can't change anything in this world. So here's the strange paradox that we need to achieve. We need to become both critical of the information around us, but also use that criticism in a way that it doesn't allow us to become cynical, but allows us to enter into democratic conversations, interactions, fruitful conversations with other people. So Ukraine is really in the center of the world's information wars. There's propaganda coming from Russia. There's disinformation campaigns being used by all sorts of business interests and political interests from within Ukraine, at the national level, at the local level. It really is, you know, in the trenches of today's information warfare. As a result, Ukrainians, I think, are in general pretty mentally tough. You know, they're not naive. Ukrainians know that there are a lot of people out there trying to use them and influence them through the tools of modern information war. So in that sense, I think Ukrainians are actually in a very good place. However, there is this flip side. All the sociology we have shows that Ukrainians are very cynical. They don't trust any media a lot of the time. They don't trust Russian media, but they also don't trust local media. They don't necessarily trust Western media. Now, you know, this is potentially a problem in and of itself, this cynicism. I think now, with the coronavirus, this is becoming not just a political issue, but a public health crisis. If the population doesn't trust vaccines, doesn't trust medical advice, doesn't trust public health guidelines, this isn't just a political problem, this becomes a public health problem where people die. So in this environment, where people are skeptical and cynical for very good reasons, but where also skepticism and cynicism could lead to a huge public health crisis. How do we get the balance right? That's the challenge. And I think, you know, the path ahead for Ukraine is to really think very hard for anybody who's dealing in communications, whether it's government communications, health communications, media, the role of journalists, but also the responsibility of audiences to understand, you know, who are the sources that we trust? Yeah. Who are the people who we do trust? Doesn't matter what channel they're on. Who do we trust? Why do we trust them? What sort of evidence do they have to give for us to trust them? And we do know there are some groups in society that people do trust. People still do trust the medical profession in general. People still definitely trust civic activists, charities. They don't really trust government and haven't traditionally trusted government. They do trust local government much more. So we really need an all-national effort in finding out who do people trust and how to communicate this information. Media has a huge role to play. How does media cover the coronavirus and everything around it so that people become educated for the good of their own well-being? So like any country, Ukraine has, you know, very varied audiences. In Ukraine, the usual educational, professional categories that we use are, of course, then also accentuated by regional differences, which have a very strong political, aspect. So you have a lot of fragmentation in the audience, and any good media producer has to think about audiences. However, what we're finding is there are a lot of good things that bring audiences together across the country. What we found is that Ukrainians are united in a common experience of resilience through traumatic history, whether that's the traumas of the Chernobyl or traumas of the 1990s. So there's a lot of commonality there and a common tradition of uniting in times of danger, which we see all across the country. With that, a trust to civic activists who become these kind of agents of uniting people. So there are things that unite people across the country and across different demographics. There are also negative things that unite people across different demographics and across the country. And very specifically, that's conspiratorial thinking. Ukrainians have an incredibly high level of conspiratorial thinking. I think somewhere almost half the country believes in conspiratorial ways of making sense of the world. Moreover, this isn't really predicted by education. People can be highly educated and still think in conspiratorial ways. People can be less educated and be resistant to conspiratorial thinking. We see this across the world. But in Ukraine, because there's such a high level of conspiratorial thinking generally, that's something that has to be considered. To the extent that film producers, TV producers think about what to do about it, I mean, I think it's a case of trying to understand why people are driven towards conspiratorial thinking. What we know from sociology, that it has a lot to do with a sense of insecurity in the world, a sense of instability, a sense of a lack of community. Conspiracy theories give people a sense of belonging. And in a country that's gone through so many changes, so much instability, so many cataclysms, perhaps it's not unnatural that people reach for conspiratorial thinking. But that is one of the great challenges. At the end of the day, conspiratorial thinking destroys democratic discourse, it destroys the opportunity for people to talk to each other, understand each other. And that's something that needs to be explored and tackled. So 2021 will be defined not just in Ukraine, but throughout the world in this, what you might describe as the final battle between fake news and evidence, between fantastical thinking and scientific thinking. We've had this battle play out very intensely over the last few years across the world. But with the coronavirus and the information around the vaccine and delivering good information about that vaccine and getting people to take the vaccine in the face of various types of disinformation, that's the great challenge of 2021. Again, this is a challenge that Ukraine faces with the rest of the world. Everybody's going through this. And I think this is a fantastic opportunity then as well for Ukraine to start, sharing its experience with other countries and sharing, coming to common best practices. This is a crisis which is as strong in America as it is in Ukraine. So it's a real opportunity to learn from each other and to create new tactics and techniques to tell stories, deliver information, but also I think we have to create, entertainment formats that make sure that we can defeat this virus. The other great opportunity is I think a growing understanding in Europe and America that Russian disinformation campaigns are a threat. If you look at the new European Union Democracy Action Plan, for the first time, they talk about the threat of foreign states using disinformation to attack European countries. This is something that Ukraine has known about for many years. For the first time, we see Europeans understanding this is a real threat. This is not just old school TV propaganda that you can just ignore. This is a new type of threat. And I really hope that Europe and Ukraine can become closer in understanding this threat, in strategically finding ways to deal with it. And my great hope is in some sort of alliance around this, so that an information attack on Ukraine, a cyber attack, or a disinformation campaign aimed at the electoral system or aimed at the public health system coming from Russia is seen in Europe as an attack on Europe as well. I think that it's been a long time. It's taken a long time for people in Europe to understand that what Ukraine has been fighting can't just be included under old ideas of, you know, open information and so on and so forth. This is a new type of challenge that needs a new strategic response with research, and with also understanding the huge role that popular culture has in fighting this, in explaining it, but also in giving people enough education to resist it. And I really hope there'll be more and more commonality between Europe and Ukraine, between America and Europe and Ukraine, but also with such countries as Taiwan, who are on the forefront of Chinese disinformation. I really want to see all these countries and all these powers coming together, sharing experiences, sharing best practices, and helping each other. Because this threat is only going to grow and grow. But Ukraine, like no other country, has been on the forefront of these challenges and has a lot to teach the world. Disinformation, new age propaganda, this is the new reality that we live in. Obviously, you know, education plays a large role in fighting this, but at the end of the day, we know this from decades of research. You know, education is always a bit of a turn off for people. Yeah, if you really want to reach people, you've got to do it through entertainment. We know that from, you know, the way that soap operas in Mexico helps improve public health in that country. We know how, you know, education around AIDS in America was helped by TV series. So, you know, the great virus of our times isn't just public health, it's also disinformation. But the way that we really start to unpack and get people to understand this issue better and change their behavior is through entertainment. That's how you get to people, whether it's game shows or films where these issues are explored in a dramatic form, whether it's, you know, fun types of social advertising. That's the way you get to people. This theme can't be seen as just, you know, media literacy that you do on Friday afternoon in school. That'll never popularize it. It has to be integrated into entertainment. And I think that's the most interesting challenge. How do you make content that is both educational and entertaining? How do you make people want to watch this content simply because it's great content, but as they watch it, they become intellectually armed for one of the great battles of our age?